This person is Jenny Murray, and apparently she is a journalist of some note in Britain, and she said something that's got her in a little bit of hot water. Apparently, she stepped outside the bounds of the cultural Marxist framework, their paradigm, and you got to stay inside that. Otherwise, you get yourself in a heap of trouble. There are some things they call it politically correct. I would call it, the cultural Marxist paradigm. Got to stay inside this realm of thinking. Now, they're going to give you a little bit of leeway because that gives the illusion of free thought and freedom of expression. But if you get beyond the borders, beyond the boundaries, well, it's akin to a slave escaping the plantation. They go get you and beat you for it. Drag you back into the plantation and give you a whooping. Okay, this is the story. Apparently, Jenny Murray said that transgender people, that is men who had some kind of a, some kind of a surgery, I don't know necessarily surgery or not, but had some kind of a transformation physically to make them women, but they're really not women at all, because their logic is they did not grow up as girls. And having not grown up as girls, they really don't have the woman experience. And I think there is some credibility to what she's saying. My only worry that comes to mind is when you start thinking that way, the next thing you know, you've got these left-wing lunatic feminidiots who are not feminist at all, who start raising their little boys as girls, so they will have the life experience of being a girl. Of course, come to think of it, there are some schools in Europe that have Dress Like a Girl Day, where the boys dress like girls and the girls dress like boys. It's also called Perversion Day, but that's another story. Okay, let's go over to the source article. This is dailymail.com, dailymail.uk, and here's what we read about this. It says, now BBC silences Jenny Murray and transgender row. Broadcaster warns host not to speak about controversial topics after facing calls to sack her over her comments. Okay, this is what happens when you step outside the perimeters. You get attacked. It's kind of like they have these patrol dogs that circle and patrol around the boundaries of what you are and are not allowed to say. And if you go outside the boundaries, you get bit. And they chase you back. Well, it's kind of like sheep being guarded by sheepdogs. We are the sheep and the liberals are the sheepdogs. And if you dare go outside the boundaries, they chase you back in. And if you refuse to go back in, well, then they just kick you out totally. You basically are isolated. Extremist religious cults do the same thing. If you don't go along with their dogma or doctrine, they will stigmatize you. They will, what they call, shun you. You're outside. The radical left-wing gays do the same thing. Homosexuals do the same thing, only they call it jamming. And they don't necessarily do it to people who leave the fold, but if you don't agree with them, what they will do is they will socially ostracize you. You will lose your job, you will lose your friends, everybody will think you're a bad guy. They do it intentionally. That's just how leftists think. And then they say, but we're inclusive. Okay, the story says the BBC told Jenny Murray, show you where we're reading here. BBC told Jenny Murray that she must remain neutral on controversial subjects. However, Murray had argued, as we mentioned earlier, transgender women, I don't think they're women. If they used to be men and now they're women, that's not possible. If you used to be a man, you're still a man. If you have XY chromosomes when you were born, you have XY chromosomes now. Pretending you have XX chromosomes does not give you XX chromosomes. Okay, so anyhow, Murray had argued transgender women don't have. Let me read this again. That doesn't make sense. Murray had argued transgender women don't have shared experience of growing up female. I think that's probably a typo. And then it goes on to say transgender presenter India Willoughby called the broadcaster a dinosaur. Okay. This is called a pejorative. It's called hate speech. It's called It's called, okay, you can't argue on a logical, rational basis, so resort to name-calling. She is a dinosaur who used her position to spout bile. Usually they say something like spewing hate on the internet. In this case, they say spouting bile. Well, in other words, she said something and you can't refute what she said, so therefore you're going to say, well, it's bile because I disagree with it. And I can't be logical and rational about why I disagree with it, so I'll just call it bile. You're spewing hate on the internet, or whatever they want to say. And then it notes that BBC noted that Murray is a freelance journalist and said the views were her own. Okay, so what's going to happen to Jenny Murray is this, according to my predictions. She is either going to apologize for stepping outside the bounds, and keep in mind, a key component of thought reform is confession. I say a key component. I think it is probably the primary fundamental foundational component of brainwashing is admitting that you are wrong, even if you're not wrong. Confession. So if you don't confess, boom, you're out. Okay, we'll scroll down a little bit, and while we're doing this, let me just remind you that according to Robert J. Lifton, I'm actually reading his book that he wrote back in, the 50s or 60s, on the techniques of thought reform used by the communist China during the Cultural Revolution. And what they would do is they would take people and they would put them in prison. They would put them in chains, make their life physically uncomfortable, if not unbearable. And then they would demand that they confess to crimes like espionage. Typically, first off, they would deny it. And then they would make life a little bit even more miserable and more uncomfortable. Okay, then they would say, all right, we confess. Just let loosen the chains. They would loosen the chains and then put them back on and say, wait a minute, we don't like your confession because we think it's disingenuous. I don't know what the Chinese word for disingenuous is, but I'm sure they have one. And they would just keep this process going for sometimes years, 2 to 3 years. The person would continually confess, and it was never enough. It was never right. They were always leaving something out. They just knew it. Eventually what happens is, now follow this because it's important, eventually what happens is, the person who is being brainwashed, who is undergoing this thought reform technique, starts to believe their own confession. So the intent and purpose of demanding the person confess is never to get a confession. The purpose is to get the person to believe this lie themselves, to believe they are bad people. That is what cultural Marxists do to us. You need to confess that you have white privilege. I don't have white privilege. Then they start beating up on you. Psychologically, socially, they put chains on you and make life miserable. Confess you have white privilege. They will do this for years or whatever it takes until eventually we believe, maybe we do have white privilege. Or maybe white people really are racist. Or maybe that transgendered man really is a woman. We just keep confessing, and they have us continually confessing until we are overwhelmed by guilt, and suddenly we see the light of day. Yes, we were wrong, you were right. It's a thought reform, brainwashing technique, and they use it all the time, they being the far left, so watch out for that. Okay, let's just wind up by reading 2 more sentences here. It says the BBC, we're reading here, the BBC has been accused of silencing freedom of speech after it warned Jenny Murray not to speak openly about controversial topics. And of course, it's violating freedom of speech. But in Europe, we've got it bad in the United States, but in Europe, it's actually, much of speech is actually, there are laws that don't allow you to say what you want to say. They'll literally put you in jail for being a racist. They call it hate speech. They say it's illegal. And if you speak your mind freely, they put you in jail. It says, Dame Jenny sparked a row when she said transgender women who have previously lived as men with all the privilege that entails do not have the shared experience of growing up female. So that is the problem. If you previously lived as a male, and now you say that you are a female, then you're not really a woman because you have not experienced, according to her, you haven't experienced what it was like growing up to become a woman. And I think she's got a point. I may not agree with her on a lot of things. I don't think transgendered women are women at all. I think they're men who are pretending to be women. Some of them have genuine, legitimate psychological problems. We should not dismiss that out of hand. But the fact of the matter is, if the chromosome is XY, it's XY. You can't change that. Now, maybe someday in the future they'll figure out a way to change it. I don't think that will ever happen. I think it's physiologically impossible. It just won't happen. But you got to be careful saying things are impossible because somebody will figure it out maybe. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to share it on social media. Lower right-hand corner, there's a little round button that says subscribe. If you click on that, you can become a subscriber to our YouTube channel. Also, would like for you to leave a comment in the comment section below and answer this question. Do you think once an individual, what do you call it, experiences, goes through that, quote, transformation, goes through the surgery from being a man to a woman, is that person legitimately a woman, or is it just a man dressed up like a woman in a very radical sense? Would like to know what you have to say about that.
How to subscribe. Click subscribe. Click the bell. Check the box. Save.